Hi, my name is Juliet, and I wanted to talk about my grandmother on my fraternal side. So my dad's mother. Um, Her name is Wu Shihui. She's Cantonese, and I didn't meet her until I was 18. I met her when I was tiny, but then I met her for the first time when I was 18, and I couldn't speak Mandarin. And she taught me random words, trying to talk to me. Um, and because I met her right before college, I decided to take Mandarin in college so that I could learn to talk to her. And one of the great things about um, that decision is that I've ended up being able to ask her more about the family history and her life. And that's been a fun thing, a fun motivator for learning Chinese and getting to know my family on that side. Um, yeah, so one really great story she told me was um, so my grandmother was a lot more educated than most Chinese women would be. She grew up in Guangzhou, which is also known as Canton, and her father was the son of an educational minister, and their family had four girls born before they had a boy. So their fifth child was a boy, and so I think my great grandfather started to lose hope and decided to educate the women in the family. And so it was really rare, but my grandmother ended up learning Mandarin. Um, and she was fairly educated for a woman of that time. And so her family was powerful before the communists took over. So when the communists took over, a lot of her family was not kind of looked down upon for being educated, but because she could speak Mandarin, she ended up working as a translator, and that's how she met my grandfather. Um, and so my grandfather was like a poor peasant, and he ended up working as a soldier. So he rose really high in the ranks and ended up being, politically important in Guangzhou as a member of the Chinese Communist Party. Um, and he married my grandmother because she was his translator, and they fell in love when she was translating for him. But decades later, when I was in college, my grandfather passed away, and a group of younger students that were journalist students, they came to interview my grandmother about my grandfather's life, and they wanted to know, where he came from, major events in his life, and they wanted to write up a quick article about him as a political leader, as a patriot, and whatnot. And they ended up doing half of the article on my grandmother because um, she's very sociable and very sweet. And when they talked to her, as they asked her about the harder times during the kind of early years of the Chinese, um, yeah, during the early years of like China's establishment, she told them really interesting stories about being interviewed and being locked up in a prison camp when she had just had my father. And basically that was the time in the mid-1950s when the Cultural Revolution was starting to get more violent, and she basically was locked up and interrogated for weeks because she had been educated, and she was considered, like a certain type of class that was not politically desirable at that time. And so right after she had my father, she was taken away, and she told me that they would shine a really bright light on her, and they wouldn't let her sleep at all, and they would not feed her very much. And it was hard for her, I think, especially because she just had a baby, but she wanted to also to be with him, so I think that was difficult. But I think in the end, because my grandfather was politically connected, um, they let her go, and she remains really patriotic. China just seems to see it as a dark time in their history. But yeah, I just thought it was, I guess the students that came to her thought it was a really powerful story about um, the utility of educating women, and um, how a young Chinese woman could be tested so much, I guess, for political reasons and still remain um, happily patriotic and remain a good mother. But yeah, ultimately, I think in her older age, I think it's the fact that she was educated remains a really interesting thing that shapes her life now as an older woman and as a role model. And yeah, so I just wanted to honor her for Women's History Month. Yeah, so this is, I just brought a book of photographs of my family, and this is my grandmother, my grandfather, my father, and my uncle, and my great grandfather on my grandfather's side.